Okay, ji. So, Assalamu alaikum and a very good morning to all of you. And let's start with the हाँ जी. So, हम अपनी presentation खोलते हैं. Just a minute, बेटा. Just 1 minute. Zoom पे. एक second. No, just give me 1 second. अच्छा जी. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. And let us start with the pharyngeal apparatus. हम बहुत कर चुके हैं इसको, but we are about to end this lecture now. The pharyngeal apparatus now. Now we were doing the development of the face, and I hope कि आपको ये समझ आई थी. मैं tongue पे दोबारा आती हूँ. और we were doing the nerve supply of the tongue. Before we go any further, मैंने उस दिन आपको ये repeat कर दी थी because इसकी nerve supply जो थी वो हमें थोड़ा सा आप लोगों को शायद उसमें प्रॉब्लम होगी. So, do we have any questions regarding the nerve supply? उस दिन मैंने repeat की थी. अच्छा, अगर होगी, if you have any questions, तो please do let me know. हम बीच में से उसको repeat कर लेंगे, उसको halt करके. तो I will repeat the nerve supply of the tongue. Okay, now, so हमने glands कर लिए थे. Let me start all again with the development of the face. हम कर चुके हैं. I told you there were 3 prominences: median, midline prominence, single prominence. वो single prominence जो थी, that was the frontonasal prominence, and then you had 2 lateral prominences. एक maxillary prominence थी, एक mandibular prominence थी, और ये जो maxillary prominence थी, this was because of proliferation of mesenchyme in the cranial part of the first arch. जो maxillary prominence first arch में थी, उसकी mesenchyme की proliferation की वजह से ये maxillary prominence बनी, and then came the mandibular prominence. This mandibular prominence developed because of proliferation of mesenchyme in the caudal part of the first arch. अब ये देख लीजिए कि this is the future mouth, developing mouth, stomodium. ये जो stomodium है, the prominences are arranged in such a way that the frontonasal prominence is the cranial prominence. Then you have 2 lateral prominence, maxillary prominence on the lateral side, or 2 mandibular prominence here. This is one on the lateral side and extending inferiorly. So caudally, you have the mandibular prominence. And the mandibular prominence develops into the jawbone, inferior jaw, that is the mandible. And this is the and part of the lower lip, and this is the first to develop. Achha. After this, let me go on. The two maxillary prominence, ये frontonasal prominence आपको बताया था, इसके lateral side पे you have a thickening that deepens down and forms the nasal pit. इसके medial or lateral side पे because of the proliferation of mesenchyme, you have the formation of the two medial nasal prominences, and on the lateral side, proliferation of mesenchyme results into lateral nasal prominences. Because of proliferation of mesenchyme in the lateral part of the head, these prominences move towards each other. They fuse with each other in the midline, form a single prominence that develops into the bridge of the nose and nasal septum, and also part of the upper lip. Jabki the lower lip is contributed by the mandibular prominence. Upper lip की contribution मैंने आपको बताई थी, partly. अच्छा, दूसरी बात ये जो बताई थी आपको कि यहाँ पे repeat कर देती है because now we are going to do the palate. कि the two maxillary prominences join to each other and form this segment, this part which is called the intermaxillary segment. This intermaxillary segment then develops into three parts. You have a part that forms the lip, so इसको labial component कहते हैं. You have a part that forms the premaxilla. Premaxilla is that part that lodges the four incisor teeth. ये वाला part जिसमें चार है, its four incisor teeth are present. ये premaxilla होता है, and then the most posterior part. This is the called the palatal component because this develops into the primary palate. So ये जो yellow part है, this develops into the, this entire thing is the intermaxillary segment developed from the intermaxillary segment that develops into the upper lip, the part that develops lodges the four incisor teeth, and then you have the primary palate. Okay, यहाँ तक हमने कर लिया था. अब हम ये upper lip की formation भी कर लेते हैं. Nasolacrimal duct पे आ जाते हैं before we go on to the development of nose. Nasolacrimal duct आपको पता है. We've already done the nasolacrimal duct in gross anatomy. Actually, the nasolacrimal duct starts at the medial angle of the eye and descends vertically, opens into the inferior meatus. Start कैसे होती है? ये lateral nasal prominence है, ये maxillary prominence है. So between the lateral nasal prominence and the maxillary prominence, this area, this goes into depression. This area is depressed and it forms the nasolacrimal groove. Okay? This groove separates the maxillary prominence from the lateral nasal prominence. Up surface overlying, it is covered by, the surface is covered by ectoderm. So when this groove is formed, the ectoderm obviously gets depressed, and now the ectoderm is lying in the floor of the groove. Okay? Proliferation of ectoderm की वजह से this groove, ectoderm in the floor of the groove over here in this area, ectoderm in the groove, this proliferates and then becomes a solid rod. Up, I hope you remember कि ectoderm to surface पे है ना बेटा. Deep down, underlying the ectoderm, you have mesenchyme. So up when the epithelium ये proliferate करती है, and epithelium forms a solid rod. This solid rod is now gets separated from the underlying mesenchyme. Okay? So now we have a solid rod which is lying between the mesenchyme and the overlying ectoderm. This rod canalizes and it gets converted into the nasolacrimal duct. अभी तक ये इस तरह oblique से पड़ा हुआ है, but then with the development of more mesenchyme and connective tissue into this developing phase, this rod becomes more vertically placed. And the important thing to remember is that this nasolacrimal duct at the upper end, at the cranial end, the nasolacrimal duct gets expanded. It enlarges, expands, and develops into the sac, lacrimal sac, yeah, nasolacrimal sac. Achha. Now, one thing to remember is that once the rod, this detaches from the surface. Once the rod detaches from the ectoderm, what happens is कि ये जो maxillary prominence और lateral prominence जो है, ठीक है, they become इनके दरमियान जो barrier था, that is broken down, and these prominences they fuse with each other. So the maxillary prominence fuses with the lateral nasal prominence, and then later on, and intramembranous ossification starts in the bones of the face. So ये जो nasolacrimal duct जो develop हुई थी, इसके upper end got dilated and developed into the lacrimal sac. This nasolacrimal duct is surrounded by developing bone, or medial angle of the eye. It becomes vertically oriented and comes to lie on the medial side of the medial angle of the eye. अच्छा जी, आपको बताया था कि ये पार्ट जो नोज का है, ब्रिज ऑफ द नोज, डोर्सम ऑफ द नोज, ये सारा पार्ट, ये this develops from the frontonasal process. ये जो lateral side पे ये जो है ala of the nose, ये lateral nasal swelling से आता है. Sorry, lateral nasal prominence कह लें आप या lateral nasal swelling कह लें. This develops from the lateral nasal swelling. अब ये tip of the nose यहाँ पे, ठीक है, nasal septum deep inside, they are formed from the fusion of medial nasal prominences. मैं फिर से repeat कर देती हूँ. I'm sorry. The bridge of the nose, ये वाला part, and dorsum of the nose, ये जो आपको bone tip पे feel हो रही है, over यहाँ feel हो रही है. This develops from this yellow is the frontonasal prominence. Okay. Lateral part में lateral nasal prominence है. This lateral nasal prominence develops into the lateral part, yeah, ala of the nose, the nostrils, the lateral part. Okay. And then deeper down, deep inside you have the nasal septum developing from the medial nasal prominence. You have the nasal septum, you have the tip of the nose, यहाँ पे, the crest of the nose and nasal septum. ये सारा जो है, this develops from the medial nasal prominence, और philtrum भी हमने कहा था. अच्छा जी, now what happens in the 5th week? अभी तक कोई प्रॉब्लम तो नहीं है? I don't think so. किसी ने कुछ कहा नहीं? Any questions? I suppose not. It's all very clear to you. अच्छा जी बेटा, 5th week में जाके what happens is कि ऑरिकल्स begin to develop. ऑरिकल्स ये पिना, कान, ठीक है? अब ये कैसे डेवलप होते हैं? फर्स्ट ग्रूव, the first groove I told you develops on the outer surface of the pharyngeal arches. The groove was between the first arch and the second arch. ठीक है? First groove की बात कर रहे हैं. 6 auricular hillocks. Hillocks is a small hill. 6 auricular hillocks. ये develop करती हैं. They develop into the auricle that is pinna and the external acoustic meatus. वो जो हमने since अभी आपने air नहीं किया, next week इंशाल्लाह we'll do it. अब इसकी डिटेल में इंशाल्लाह आपको नेक्स्ट सिस्टम जो मैं आपको करवाऊंगी दैट इज द एयर एंड आईज स्पेशल सेंसेस की डेवलपमेंट होती है. सो स्पेशल सेंसेस की डेवलपमेंट में विल डू द एयर, बट फॉर नाउ रिमेंबर वन थिंग, द डेवलपिंग एयर, एक्सटर्नल एयर की बात कर रही हूँ. डेवलपिंग एक्सटर्नल एयर टू बिगिन विद इज एट द लेवल of the neck. Okay, but then the mandible develops, the other structures develop, and this developing air ye ascend karte hain and they come to lie at the level of the eyes. Level of the eyes is the area where you have the if you look at your eyes, put a hand through them, put it, drag them laterally, you come across your ear. So the ultimate adult positions you have, that's at the level of the eyes. So from the neck, the developing air comes to lie at the level of the eyes. Besides, one more thing, I told you earlier on as well that the eyes are wide apart. They are on the lateral aspects of the developing face. But then what happens, you have more connective tissue, more mesenchyme is added to the lateral aspect of the developing face. As a result, the head broadens. As it broadens behind the eyes, okay? As a result, the eyes tend to move medially. The next thing to develop is the cheeks and the lips. Once again, mesenchymes develop. होते हैं. कौन सी mesenchyme? Cheeks, mainly the cheeks, ठीक है? They develop from mesenchyme of the second arch. Second arch की mesenchyme enters this area which will develop into future face. This second arch mesenchyme develops into muscles of facial expression. Second arch की nerve is the 7th cranial nerve. As a result, you have the nerve supply of the muscles of facial expression and muscles of the cheek, namely the buccinator. Muscle of the cheek is buccinator. So you have these muscles getting its supply from nerve of the second arch, which is the 7th cranial nerve, namely facial nerve. First arch की mesenchyme जो कि okay, thank you for तो हम बात कर रहे थे इसकी. So there was some interruption because of breakdown, electricity breakdown. But I guess you know. Okay, now I'm back with you. We were talking about the development of the cheeks. और मैंने आपको बताया था कि second arch की mesenchyme जो है that invades the area where you have the cheeks now, This second arch mesenchyme, since it is supplied by the muscles of facial expression, that develops into the muscles of facial expression, which is supplied by seventh cranial nerves. Seventh cranial nerve is a nerve of the second arch. फर्स्ट आर्च की मेसेनकाइम भी इसमें कंट्रीब्यूट करती है चीक्स की डेवलपमेंट में. ये जो फर्स्ट आर्च की मेसेनकाइम है, दिस डेवलप्स इनटू muscles of mastication, and you all know the muscles of mastication is supplied by the mandibular division of the trigeminal nerve. So that is why you have two types of cranial nerves developing, supplying different parts in the face. And ये जो आपके paranasal sinuses हैं, इनमें से you just have the maxillary air sinus developing before birth. All the other nasal sinuses develop after birth. और maxillary air sinus में से भी जो at the time of birth, the maxillary air sinus is rudimentary, hardly developed. Okay. अच्छा, a very quick look at the development of the nasal cavities. अब ये जो क्विक लुक है, इसमें हमने बात की थी कि the mesenchyme on the lateral aspects of the frontonasal prominences, ये the ectoderm proliferate करती है, develops into a nasal clay coat. The nasal clay coat mesenchyme on either side of its developing nasal clay coat, this proliferates. This proliferating mesenchyme develops into a lateral nasal prominence and a medial nasal prominence, and this nasal clay coat, as a result, becomes depressed. A depressed area between the two prominences is called nasal pit. अब 6th week में जाके ये जो nasal pit है, this grows posteriorly and develops into what's called a nasal sac. अब इस nasal sac के inferiorly you have the oral cavity. So floor में इसके नीचे oral cavity पड़ी है, इसके roof में developing brain है. Okay. And posteriorly over here, posteriorly you have the oronasal membrane, because this is the developing oral cavity. I repeat once again, ये जो nasal pit थी, this deepens. As it deepens, it grows posteriorly. This deepening nasal pit is called nasal sac. This nasal sac has the oral cavity inferiorly. So the floor is formed by the oral cavity. Superiorly, the roof is formed by the developing brain. अब ये जो floor है ना, this fuses with the oronasal membrane over here. ये primary palate development. Okay, so this is the oronasal membrane, and the floor of the sac fuses with the oronasal membrane. अच्छा जी, फिर ये oronasal membrane जो है, this gets ruptured, and you have the formation of the primary coine. Coine आपको we'll do the coine later on. It is simply a communication between the nose and the primary pharynx. Now this initially, to begin with, is filled with a mucus plug, but 13th to 15th week पे ये जो mucus plug है, this disappears, and you have the and posterior to primary palate. ये जब disappear कर जाएगा, this is the primary palate. So the primary coine will lie posterior to the primary palate. Okay. Over here, you're going to have the secondary choanae, or what secondary choanae is going to lie at the junction of the pharynx and the oral cavity. ये सारा मैंने सिर्फ आपको इसलिए बताया है कि this will develop when the nasal septum develops. When the nasal septum develops, dividing the cavity of the nose into two, right and left cavities, that is the time when definitive choanae develop. अब ये देख लीजिए, lateral wall of the nose में you have three prominent cells: superior, middle and inferior concha. ये concha simply elevations होती हैं lateral wall of the nose में, ठीक है? Superior and middle concha is from the ethmoid bone, and inferior concha is a separate bone in itself. और जब हम इंशाल्लाह when we do the nose, we'll do the concha with it. In the roof of this nasal cavity over here, you have development of specialized epithelium, which is called olfactory epithelium. इसमें olfactory cells होते हैं या specialized receptors होते हैं. These receptors are sensitive to smell. ठीक है? ये जो आपके specialized cells या receptors हैं, इन ये neurons यहाँ पे bodies होती हैं, and then the axons of these neurons lying in this area, ye then make up the olfactory nerve that goes and relays in this area on the brain, which is the olfactory bulb. मैं इसको फिर repeat कर देती हूँ, since आपने भी अभी gross anatomy में पढ़ा नहीं है. In this area develops the olfactory. This is the olfactory area, जहाँ पे olfactory epithelium develop होती है. Olfactory epithelium is a combination of olfactory cells and receptors. From the olfactory cells arise these olfactory axons that go and relay in the olfactory bulb. ये axons जो हैं, they make up the olfactory nerve. The olfactory nerve goes and relays in the olfactory bulb. This olfactory bulb, ये जब हम इंशाल्लाह when we do the first cranial nerve, तो फिर हम ये करेंगे, ठीक है? But I just want to remind you of one thing, that is the nasal septum. I told you that the nasal septum was formed by the two fused mandibular, two fused medial nasal prominences. And if you look at your palate, if you put your tongue on the undersurface of your palate, I hope you appreciate one thing, that on the superior surface or on the upper surface of the palate, you can only feel your hard palate. The nose is lying on the upper surface, the nose is on the upper surface of the palate. And the nasal septum is a partition between the two nasal cavities that is actually touching the upper surface of the palate, hard palate. So nasal septum basically is simply a growth from the inner surfaces of the merged medial nasal swellings. यहाँ पे मैं आपको दिखा देती हूँ, ये जो मैंने भी आपको बताया, this is the palate. This is the cavity of the nose, nasal cavity. So please note, the nasal cavity is above the palate. ये primary palate है, ये secondary palate है, ठीक है? The nasal cavity is above the palate. And this nasal cavity is divided into right and left half by the growth of the nasal septum. So the nasal septum will come and touch this palate, and hence divide the nasal cavity into a right and left. अच्छा जी. One quick look at what develops from which part. Frontonasal prominence cell you have the development of the forehead. ये frontonasal prominence, ठीक है? You have the development of the forehead, you have the development of medial nasal prominence and lateral nasal prominence, and you also have the development of bridge of the nose. So it is forehead, bridge of the nose, the medial nasal prominence and the lateral nasal prominence. ये green में, okay? Maxillary prominence से, ये, this is the yellow is the maxillary prominence. So the maxillary prominence develops into the cheeks and the lateral part of the upper lip. ये इतना, ये वाला part, lateral part of the upper lip. Medial nasal prominence. This was the medial nasal prominence that approached each other and merged with each other. This medial nasal prominence on the surface develops into the philtrum of the upper lip, the crest of the upper lip, and the tip of the nose. Crest of the nose, sorry, crest, this top hard part, and the tip of the nose. And of course, on the inside, don't forget, here on the inside, deep down, you have the development of the nasal septum. Lateral nasal prominence, ye lateral part, develops into the ala of the nose, and mandibular prominence, ye blue part. This develops into the lower lip and the mandible. ये table जो है, this is given in Langman. I took it from there. आपकी इसमें मैंने नहीं देखी है, ठीक है? It's a good table. अच्छा जी, one quick look. Paranasal sinuses. How do they develop? Now, the paranasal sinuses, they develop from as outgrowths. Diverticula, ठीक है? कहाँ से? Nose, lateral wall of the nose से. And these outpocketings from the lateral walls of the nose, they grow into the surrounding bone, developing bone. ठीक है? वो जो mesenchyme bone में हो गई थी, develop, they grow into that bone. I told you the maxillary sinus is present at the time of birth. It starts to develop in the fetal period. All the rest of the nasals are paranasal sinuses that develop in post-natal life. In the childhood, these paranasal sinuses get filled with air. And ये जो obviously अगर ये outpocketings हैं तो फिर इनकी opening, inner opening भी होगी. ये जो openings जो हैं, they develop into orifices or openings of the paranasal sinuses. Inshallah, we'll do this in gross anatomy. You will understand. One quick look at the postnatal development of paranasal sinuses. I told you, okay, other than the maxillary sinus, all the other paranasal sinuses are either rudimentary or they are absent at the time of birth. The maxillary air sinus, even though it is developed, it is very small at the time of birth. Okay? But then, gradually, as the face grows in size, the paranasal sinuses also increase in size. And then, with the eruption, at the time of eruption of permanent teeth, जब permanent teeth जब निकलते हैं, then actually that is the time when the paranasal sinuses, they grow and they develop. The most rapid to grow, rapidly growing is the ethmoidal sinus, okay, between 2 to 6 years of age develop होता है. Anterior ethmoidal air sinus जो है frontal bone में develop होता है, visible by 7 years of life. So at 7 years of life, you have to take an X-ray. You will be able to see the anterior ethmoidal air sinus. Most of the posterior ethmoidal air sinus, they develop posteriorly. They grow posteriorly into the sphenoid bone. Why has God made the paranasal sinuses? Actually, we don't really know. Okay. why did God make the paranasal sinuses? एक तो कहते हैं कि they add resonance to the voice. दूसरी possibility ये है कि they change the shape of the developing face. So shape and size of the face is determined. Any change in shape and size of the face is because of the development of paranasal sinuses, and ये voice change होती है at the time of puberty. This is also because of paranasal sinuses. पैलेट की डेवलपमेंट कर लेते हैं. पैलेट की डेवलपमेंट में आपको बताया था कि you have a primary palate, you have a secondary palate, and then this primary and secondary palate begin to develop at the 6th week of intrauterine life. It is complete by 12th week, और जिसमें critical period होता है development का, that is between 6 to 9 weeks. The primary palate, we've discussed this earlier, develops as a posterior projection of the intermaxillary segment. Posterior projection of the intermaxillary segment. अच्छा जी, ये देख लीजिए, ये जो posterior projection है, this is triangular in shape. So यहाँ पे जो mesenchyme है, this begins to proliferate. On either side, ये the maxilla, developing maxilla, ठीक है? यहाँ पे जो mesenchyme है, this begins to proliferate. Then you have mesenchyme in this triangular posterior part of the intermaxillary segment. This also begins to proliferate because this triangular mesenchyme going posteriorly, this develops into the primary palate, और ये जो maxilla है, the maxillary prominences से जो develop हुआ है, this maxilla, we are now talking about the inner surface of the maxilla. अभी तक जो हमने maxilla से जो mesenchyme develop की थी, that was from the external surface, outer surface से हमने cheeks बनाई थी from the maxillary prominence. But now we are viewing the mesenchyme on the inner side, from the side of the mouth cavity. अब हम उस side पे हैं. Primary palate मैंने बता दिया, develops from the intermaxillary segment. अब ये जो lateral, ये जो maxilla के inner surface, the surface of the maxilla that is facing the inside of the mouth cavity, वहां से secondary palate develop होता है. That this secondary palate in postnatal life will be represented as hard palate and as soft palate. Okay? Hard and soft palate develop from this growing secondary palate. अभी इसको करते हैं. अब ये देख लीजिए, ये दो shelf-like projections हैं. These shelf-like projections are made up of mesenchyme. ये mesenchyme कहाँ से आती है? ये maxillary prominences के inner surface. So from the inner surfaces of the maxillary prominences, you have these developing shelves of mesenchyme. These shelves of mesenchyme, they grow towards each other. That means they grow towards the midline and they grow inferiorly. They are called lateral palatine process. ये nasal septum है, ये primary palate है, ये nasal septum है. Okay. अच्छा. Up as the jaw elongates, we are talking about the mandible, lower jaw. As that elongates, this is the developing tongue. ठीक है, ये nasal septum है. This on either side are the ये lateral palatine processes. Okay. So as this lower jaw elongates, as the mandible, developing mandible, as it is stretched out, this tongue, which is so prominent over here, this is pulled down. So the tongue lowers down, making more space in the oral cavity. Continuing with the secondary palate. इसी की ही बात किए रहते हैं. This is the nasal septum, and these are the lateral palatine shelves. They are growing towards each other. They are also growing, to begin with, they are growing inferiorly. So to begin with, they were growing in the infromedial direction. But then when the tongue is pulled down, ye dekh lijiye, tongue is pulled down. So there is now more space inside this oral cavity. When the tongue is pulled down, so more space is produced. As a result, the palatine shells they now become more horizontal and they begin to grow towards each other. अब क्यों grow करते हैं? Multiple factors हैं. Hyaluronic acid है, mesenchyme है, उसकी वजह से ये processes develop हो गए हैं. These lateral palatine shells, the lateral palatine processes, they are growing to be towards each other above the tongue and inferior to the nasal septum. These palatine shelves, they approach each other in the midline. They approach each other in the midline, leaving the nasal septum on top and leaving the tongue below. Okay? So the shelves, they fuse in the midline, and we have the formation of the heart. We have the formation of the palate. With the fusion of the lateral palatine shells, the fusion of these two palatine processes in the midline gives rise to secondary palate. Then you remember, developing from the intermaxillary segment was your primary palate. This primary palate grows posteriorly and joins the secondary palate. Now the palate is complete. Okay. Then bone formation takes place. Bone formation takes place in the secondary palate, but it is restricted only to the anterior 2/3 of the secondary palate, only up to here. The posterior part of the secondary palate, ye wala part, this remains unossified. As a result, the posterior part of the secondary palate, this develops into the soft palate and the uvula. Uvula is the structure hanging down from the roof of the palate. If you open your mouth, you have a structure hanging down and moving with the movement of the palate. That is the uvula. So before I go any further, do we have any questions? I thought किसी ने भी कोई question नहीं पूछा है मुझे. It seems everything is very clear. Or perhaps you were not listening. अच्छा जी. Now what happens is कि ये जो lateral palatine shelves, जो mesenchyme थी, this develops into muscles of the palate, and this also develops into connective tissue of the soft palate. So muscles and connective tissue of the soft palate, they develop from the mesenchyme that is present in the lateral palatine shelves. Anterior 2/3 with the mesenchyme that developed into bone, but posterior 1/3 की जो mesenchyme that develops into muscle and soft tissue. In the midline, you have the nasopalatine canal. Okay, यहाँ पे. In the anterior part of the maxilla, ये maxilla is anterior part of the maxilla में you have the nasopalatine canal. अब suture develop होता है alveolar margins में. यहाँ पे ये suture runs from the alveolar margins between the ये incisor, 4 incisor teeth, ये canine है. So the suture runs between the incisor teeth and the canine teeth. This indicates the site of fusion between the primary palate and the secondary palate. And I hope you remember, I've told you this so many times, कि जो nasal septum है, that fuses with the upper surface of the hard palate. The fusion of the two palatine processes, this is indicated by this median palatine raphe कहते हैं. This midline, if you put tongue over your hard palate, you can feel this median palatal raphe. Yeah. ठीक है. 12th week में जाके ये wheel नहीं है, ये week है. 12th week में जाके ये जो primary palate है अब और secondary palate, इसके junction पे ये incisive foramen, उनके junction पे the small foramen that is there, that is the incisive foramen. अच्छा, ये एक चीज इंटरेस्टिंग है कि 6th week में mesenchyme from the internal surface of the maxillary prominence, जिनको हमने lateral palatine shells कहा था, अब 7th week में जाके they fuse with each other. ठीक है, किस किस से fuse करते हैं? They fuse with each other, they fuse with the nasal septum, and they fuse with the primary palate. The palatine shells, the lateral palatine shells, they are fused with each other to form the secondary palate. ये lateral palatine shells, they fuse with each other, they fuse with the nasal septum, and they also fuse with the primary palate. ये चीज याद रख लीजिएगा. Now, this is what the incisive foramen, site of junction of primary and secondary palate. और ये midline में जो आपको line नजर आ रही है, ये raphe है, midline raphe है. Okay. After bone formation, ये जो palatine processes थे, they develop into hard palate. जबकि posterior part of the palate does not get ossified, and this develops into soft palate and uvula. अब ये line of demarcation क्या है? Told you the nasal septum is lying and is fused with the secondary palate on its upper surface. Superior surface of the secondary palate, you have the nasal septum. The posterior end of the nasal septum, where you have the posterior end of the nasal septum, वहां तक secondary palate है, hard palate है. Beyond the posterior end of the nasal septum, so यहाँ तक nasal septum होगा, this is going to be the hard palate, and this part which remains unossified, इसमें bone develop नहीं होती, posterior 1/3, this is the part where you do not have the nasal septum, and this part develops into soft palate, and ये जो projection है of the soft palate, ये uvula बनाएगा. Okay, I will not do this cleft lip and cleft palate with you just now because there is very little time. Just one more minute to go. Do you have any questions? Even anything regarding this upstage? Any questions? I'll take a revision class on Monday afternoon, 1 to 2. So if there is any question regarding this upstage, that will be okay. लेकिन Anything else? Anything you want me to repeat? नहीं है? Okay. If you have no questions, then I think I should wind up over here. I wish you all the very best of luck. Have a good weekend. Have a safe weekend. Stay safe. Stay home. Please don't bother to go out. It's very hot outside once again. And a sweet weekend. Safe weekend. Hope all goes well. Inshallah. Thank you. God bless you all.